If someone had told me that a simple college research project would completely shatter the life I thought I understood, I would have laughed it off. Back then, everything about my world felt stable, predictable. Now, when I stare into the mirror, the reflection looking back at me feels like a stranger. And the strangest part of all? It began with nothing more than an email from my professor. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 22 years old and in my final year studying psychology at Ravenwood University. I've always been the quiet type, the responsible student who turned assignments in early and never caused trouble. Professors liked me because I was dependable. Most of my classmates barely noticed I existed. My life followed a routine: classes, studying, occasional coffee breaks, and evenings with my girlfriend Mia. It wasn't exciting, but it was comfortable. At least, that's what I believed before Professor Lillian Hart invited me to take part in her research. Professor Hart had a reputation that stretched across the entire campus. People described her in two very different ways. Some said she was one of the most brilliant minds in modern psychology. Others whispered that she crossed lines most researchers were too afraid to approach. Her experiments were legendary, unusual studies that pushed the boundaries of behavioral science. Students shared rumors about the strange things that happened in her lab late at night. Nobody really knew how much of it was true. I certainly didn't. But I was about to find out. The day everything began was a cold Thursday afternoon, the kind where rain taps endlessly against the library windows. I was sitting at a desk surrounded by textbooks, struggling through a statistics assignment that made my brain feel like it was melting. My phone vibrated. I ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again. And again. With a sigh of irritation, I finally checked the notification. My stomach tightened when I saw the sender. Professor Lillian Hart. Getting an email from her usually meant one of two things. Either you had done something extremely impressive, or something terribly wrong. Curious and nervous, I opened the message. The subject line read, "Research Opportunity. Ethan, I've been reviewing recent coursework from several students. Your psychological profiling analysis from last month's exam stood out. I am currently selecting a very limited number of students to assist with an advanced behavioral research project. Your name was the first on my list. If you're interested, meet me in Lab 4 tonight at 8 p.m. This opportunity could have a significant impact on your academic future. Professor Hart." I stared at the email longer than I expected. Lab 4. At night. That alone was strange. Most research meetings happened during normal hours, but Professor Hart had never been known for following ordinary schedules. Still, an opportunity like this could change everything. The truth was, while many of my classmates already had clear plans for their futures, I felt like I was drifting without direction. My girlfriend Mia definitely wasn't drifting. Mia was the complete opposite of me. She moved through life with confidence and intensity that made everyone notice her. When she walked into a room, conversations stopped for a second. She studied fashion design and spent most of her time sketching clothing concepts, talking about fabrics, colors, and runway trends I barely understood. But somehow we worked. She liked that I was calm and steady. I loved her energy and passion. Lately, though, things had been different. Mia was preparing for a huge fashion competition that could launch her career. The pressure was turning every day into a storm of deadlines and stress. She stayed awake most nights designing new outfits, skipped meals, and sometimes snapped at me over small things. Sometimes when she looked at me, it felt like she expected me to become more ambitious, more impressive, more successful. That email from Professor Hart suddenly felt like a doorway opening in front of me. Maybe this research project could finally give me something important. Something that proved I wasn't just the quiet guy in the background. So I made my decision. My reply was short. I'll be there. That night the university felt completely different from the busy place I knew during the day. The campus was dark and silent, rain still falling softly against empty walkways. Most students had already gone home. Only the science building remained lit. Inside that building, Lab 4 was waiting. As I walked through the quiet hallway, my footsteps echoed against the polished floor tiles. The sound made the place feel even emptier. With every step, a strange nervousness crept into my chest. Something about this situation felt unusual. But turning back now felt impossible. When I finally reached the door labeled Lab 4, I paused with my hand hovering near the handle. Then I knocked. A calm voice from inside spoke immediately. "Come in, Ethan." Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. and the first thing I realized was that it looked nothing like a normal laboratory. The room didn't resemble any research lab I had ever seen. There were no microscopes, no glass beakers, no rows of computers analyzing data. Instead, the space looked like something halfway between a film studio and a fashion backstage area. Tall mirrors covered the walls. Cameras were mounted on tripods at different angles. Bright studio lights hung overhead. Clothing racks lined one side of the room filled with neatly arranged outfits. Tables were covered with makeup palettes, brushes, and cosmetic kits. And standing calmly in the middle of it all was Professor Lillian Hart. She looked the same as she always did, tall, composed, and sharp-eyed, with the kind of confidence that made people instinctively take her seriously. But tonight there was something different in the way she watched me. She looked excited. "Perfect timing," she said with a faint smile. My eyes moved slowly around the room again, trying to understand what I was seeing. "Professor, what exactly is this project?" I asked. Her smile widened slightly. "A study on psychological identity." The answer felt incomplete. Too simple. "What kind of study?" I asked cautiously. Professor Hart stepped closer, her shoes clicking softly against the floor. When she stopped in front of me, I could see the intense focus in her eyes. "The kind," she said slowly, "that examines how fragile a person's identity really is." I frowned, unsure how to respond. "I'm not sure I follow." She gestured toward the mirrors surrounding us. "Tell me something, Ethan. How confident are you about who you are?" The question caught me off guard. "I mean, pretty confident," I said. She gave a quiet laugh. "That's what everyone believes." Then she walked over to one of the clothing racks and pulled something from it. When she turned back around, my confusion instantly turned into shock. In her hands was a dress. It was elegant, stylish, clearly expensive, and completely out of place in a psychology lab. My mind struggled to make sense of it. "Professor, why is there a dress here?" She looked completely unfazed. "As I mentioned," she said calmly, "this is an identity experiment." My heartbeat started to pick up. "I still don't understand." Professor Hart studied my expression carefully, as if analyzing every reaction. "Tell me honestly, Ethan," she said. "Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to live as someone entirely different?" The question made me uncomfortable. "No," I answered quickly. But something about her expression made me uneasy. The way she looked at me felt like she already knew the answer. Before I could say anything else, she continued. "You were selected for this project because your psychological profile is remarkably adaptable." I blinked. "Adaptable?" "Yes," she said calmly. "Which means you may actually survive the transformation." My stomach tightened. Transformation. Professor Hart gently placed the dress on a nearby chair before walking toward a large metal table positioned in the center of the room. Resting on the table was a strange device. It looked small but complex, glowing faintly with soft blue light. At that moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a research study. "Professor, what exactly are you planning to do?" I asked. She turned and looked directly into my eyes. Then she spoke 4 words that sent a chill through my entire body. "I'm going to change your identity." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "That's not funny," I said nervously. But Professor Hart didn't laugh. Instead, she reached over and activated the device. The room instantly came alive. Lights flickered. Cameras powered on with quiet mechanical clicks. The mirrors reflected my anxious face from every direction. Then she spoke again, her voice calm and almost reassuring. "Relax, Ethan." She paused. "By tomorrow morning." Her voice dropped slightly. "You might not be Ethan anymore." At that moment, I had no idea just how true those words would become. Before that night ended, Professor Hart's experiment would change my life in a way I could never reverse. And the person who woke up the next morning was someone I never imagined becoming. Looking back now, I should have walked out of that lab the second she said she planned to change my identity. It would have been the smartest decision I could have made. But when Professor Hart said those words, something inside me locked in place. It wasn't just fear. It was curiosity. A dangerous kind of curiosity that pulls you closer to something you know you should avoid. "Professor, I didn't agree to anything extreme," I said carefully. She leaned casually against the metal table, watching me the way a researcher watches an unusual specimen. You agreed to participate in psychological research, she replied calmly. And this is psychological research. My eyes drifted toward the glowing device on the table again. It looked like a thin metallic band connected by cables to a compact computer unit. What does that thing do? I asked. Her smile grew slightly deeper. It helps accelerate behavioral adaptation. And somehow, that answer only made everything feel more unsettling. Her explanation didn't make any sense to me at all. Before I could press her for clarification, Professor Hart simply pointed toward the chair where the dress was resting. Before we continue, she said calmly, I need you to put that on. My mind froze. I'm sorry, what? The dress, she repeated as if she were asking me to put on a lab coat. I'm not wearing that, I replied immediately. Professor Hart didn't argue or try to convince me. She just crossed her arms and watched me. You're free to leave, she said. Relief began to settle in my chest. Then she added another sentence. But if you walk out, I'll select a different student for this project. That person will receive the research credit, the recommendation letters, and the funding opportunities attached to it. The relief vanished instantly. Those things could shape my entire future. And she knew it. Why me? I asked quietly. Professor Hart slowly circled around me like she was examining something. Because your psychological assessments revealed something unusual. She stopped beside one of the mirrors and gestured toward my reflection. You have an extremely flexible identity structure. Most people strongly resist certain roles. Your profile suggests you could adapt to them. I didn't like where this was going. So, you want me to act like someone else? I asked. She nodded once. Yes. Then she added softly. A woman. The room went silent. My brain struggled to process the word. A woman. Professor Hart remained completely calm. This experiment examines how identity can shift when perception and environment change. Tonight you'll begin experiencing the world through a completely different role. I looked back at the dress on the chair. It suddenly felt like the most threatening object in the entire room. This is insane, I muttered. Possibly, she replied. But it's also groundbreaking. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. Ethan, imagine graduating with your name attached to this research. Imagine the opportunities that would follow. My thoughts raced. Part of me wanted to walk out. Another part whispered something dangerous. What if this actually changes everything? After a long moment of silence, I let out a slow breath. This is temporary, right? Professor Hart smiled again. For now. That answer should have worried me more than it did. Instead, I slowly walked toward the chair. My hands felt strangely heavy as I picked up the dress. The fabric was soft and smooth, lighter than I expected. This is ridiculous, I murmured. Professor Hart simply pointed toward a small changing area behind a divider. I'll wait. 5 minutes later I stepped back out. And I had never felt more uncomfortable in my entire life. The dress fit closely against my body in ways I wasn't used to. The fabric brushed against my legs with every step. My face burned with embarrassment. This feels stupid, I said. Professor Hart didn't laugh. Instead, she observed me carefully as if she were recording every detail of my behavior. Walk, she instructed. What? Walk across the room. Reluctantly, I took a few steps forward. The dress shifted slightly with each movement. Felt strange, unfamiliar, yet strangely fascinating. Good, she said quietly. Then she opened a small case filled with makeup. Sit down. My eyes widened. No. Oh yes, she replied calmly. Before I could object further, she began working with steady hands. Light foundation, subtle eyeliner, soft color on my lips. Each small adjustment changed the reflection staring back at me. Little by little, the person in the mirror looked less like the Ethan I knew and more like someone else. Someone softer. Someone unfamiliar. This helps the psychological immersion, Professor Hart explained while working. Visual feedback accelerates the brain's acceptance of a role. I barely listened. I was too focused on the mirror. The person appearing there didn't look like me anymore. This doesn't even look like me, I whispered. Professor Hart nodded with satisfaction. Exactly. She then walked over to the glowing device on the table. Now the real experiment begins. My anxiety immediately returned. What does that thing actually do? I asked. She picked up the thin metallic band. It enhances emotional conditioning and identity association. In simpler terms, it helps your mind adapt to the new role more quickly. That sounded suspiciously close to mind manipulation. Is it safe? I asked. Professor Hart gently placed the device against the side of my head. It's completely controlled. The device began humming softly. A warm sensation spread across my temples. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then something subtle shifted inside my thoughts. Tiny emotional reactions. Small changes in how certain things felt. It was faint, but noticeable. How do you feel? Professor Hart asked. I hesitated. Strange. Explain. I searched for the right words. It's like, my reactions are slightly different. Professor Hart looked pleased. Excellent. Then she said something unexpected. From this moment forward, your identity within this project is Emily. My mind reacted immediately. Emily. The name echoed strangely inside my thoughts. No, I said quickly. My name is Ethan. Professor Hart tilted her head. For now. Then she pointed toward the mirror again. Look. I did. And my heart skipped a beat. The reflection staring back at me looked beautiful. My hair was styled differently. The makeup highlighted features I had never noticed before. The elegant dress flowed around my body. For a brief second I forgot who I was supposed to be. Your mind is already adapting, Professor Hart said quietly. Impressive. I forced myself to look away. This is temporary, I reminded myself. Just part of the experiment. Professor Hart nodded slightly. Yes. Then she added something that twisted my stomach. But the real test begins tomorrow. Tomorrow. You'll spend the day living as Emily. I stared at her in disbelief. You mean outside the lab? She smiled. Everywhere. Panic surged through me. That's impossible. What about Mia? Professor Hart's eyes sharpened slightly. Your girlfriend. I swallowed. She can't see me like this. Professor Hart turned to the computer and began typing notes. Then I suggest you become very good at keeping secrets. The room suddenly felt smaller. More dangerous. What if someone recognizes me? That uncertainty is part of the experiment. My pulse began racing. This is insane. Professor Hart looked at me calmly. Perhaps. Then she paused. But think about it, Ethan. Her eyes studied me. Or should I say Emily? The name sent another strange ripple through my mind. Without realizing it, I looked back at the mirror. At the girl standing there. For a moment. She didn't look like a stranger anymore. And that terrified me. Because if this experiment continued, I didn't know how long it would take before Ethan disappeared completely. When I returned to my dorm later that night, I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. The real danger wasn't Professor Hart's experiment. The real danger was Mia. And she was already starting to notice that something about me had changed. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mirror from the lab, and the girl standing inside it. Emily. The name echoed quietly in my mind, like a voice slowly growing louder. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small box Professor Hart had handed me before I left. Inside were 3 items. A neatly folded dress. A wig. And a thin silver bracelet. The bracelet looked almost identical to the device she had used earlier, only redesigned to appear normal. Wear it tomorrow, she had told me. It will stabilize the psychological transition. I didn't fully understand what that meant. But when I held the bracelet in my hand, I could feel a faint warmth inside it. Almost like it was alive. My phone vibrated. It was Mia. Hey, are you awake? I sighed and typed back. Yeah. Seconds later my phone rang. Hey, I answered. Her voice sounded tired. You disappeared tonight, Mia said. I stopped by your dorm and you weren't there. My heart jumped. Oh, yeah. I was helping a professor with a project. What kind of project? I hesitated. Psychology research. She laughed softly. You're such a nerd. Normally I would have smiled. Tonight I just felt uneasy. You should come over tomorrow, she said. I need your opinion on some outfit designs. My stomach sank. Tomorrow. The same day Professor Hart wanted me to live as Emily. Maybe later, I said quickly. I have classes. There was a pause. You're acting strange tonight, Mia said. I'm just tired, I replied. But deep down, I knew tomorrow was going to change everything. There was another long pause on the phone. Finally, Mia let out a quiet sigh. All right, she said. Just don't disappear again like that. I won't, I promised. After the call ended, I remained sitting on my bed for several minutes, staring at the small box on my desk. Inside it lay the dress, the wig, and the silver bracelet. Part of me still believed the entire situation was absurd. Just a strange academic experiment that had gotten out of hand. But another part of me remembered the strange sensation that had filled my mind when Professor Hart activated the device. And how natural the name Emily had sounded inside my thoughts afterward. Slowly I reached for the bracelet. The moment it touched my wrist, warmth flowed up my arm. It wasn't painful or alarming. If anything, it felt oddly comforting. Almost like the device recognized me. Before I could think too much about what I was doing, I opened the box again. The next morning began with a message from Professor Hart. Phase 2 begins today. Full immersion. My heart began pounding. Full immersion meant I wasn't just pretending inside the lab anymore. I was supposed to spend the entire day living as Emily, out in the real world. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my dorm, staring at my reflection. This is insane, I muttered. The bracelet on my wrist gave a faint pulse of warmth, almost as if encouraging me. Slowly my hands moved. The dress slipped over my body once again, soft fabric settling into place with surprising comfort. Next came the wig. Then the small makeup kit Professor Hart had provided. I wasn't skilled with makeup yet, and the first few attempts were awkward. But after 20 minutes of trial and error, the mirror showed someone familiar again. The same girl I had seen in the lab. Emily. My pulse quickened as I stared at her. She didn't look ridiculous. She looked real. Okay, I whispered to myself. It's just for the experiment. But as the words left my mouth, the bracelet warmed again. And suddenly the idea of being Emily didn't feel quite as strange as it had yesterday. Walking outside was the hardest part. Every step felt risky. Every person passing by made my heart jump. What if someone recognizes me? But something unexpected happened. No one did. Students walked past me without hesitation. Some even smiled politely. At the campus cafe, a guy held the door open for me. Thanks, I said softly. The word sounded different. Lighter somehow, almost natural. My heartbeat sped up. This was real. I was walking through campus as Emily and no one suspected anything. Around noon, Professor Hart asked me to return to the lab. The moment I stepped inside, she studied me closely. Then her expression brightened. Remarkable, she said. What? I asked nervously. You're adapting faster than any subject I've worked with. I frowned. Subject? You've done this before. She gave a mysterious smile. Not exactly in this form. Then she slowly circled around me, observing my posture. You're already changing your movements. I am. Yes. She gestured toward the mirror. Look. I turned and my stomach flipped. He was right. I wasn't standing like Ethan anymore. My posture had changed. My body language looked softer, more graceful. That's the bracelet, Professor Hart explained. It gently reinforces the identity. You mean it's changing how I act? I asked. It's helping your mind accept the role. That explanation didn't make me feel any better. How long is this experiment supposed to last? I asked. Her smile faded slightly. That depends. On what? She looked directly into my eyes. On how far you're willing to go. A cold shiver ran down my spine. But the real problem began later that afternoon. I was walking across campus when I saw someone I absolutely didn't want to run into. Mia. She stood near the art building talking with one of her friends. My heart began pounding violently. Turn around. But it was too late. Mia glanced in my direction. Our eyes met. For one terrifying second I thought everything was over. Then she smiled politely, the way you smile at a stranger, and turned back to her conversation. Air rushed back into my lungs. She hadn't recognized me. She had no idea that the girl standing a few feet away was actually her boyfriend. But as I walked away, a dangerous thought crept into my mind. If Mia didn't recognize me, then technically Emily could meet her. The idea made my heart race, not just with fear but curiosity. When I returned to the lab later that evening, Professor Hart noticed my distracted expression immediately. You're thinking about something, she said. I hesitated before answering. Mia didn't recognize me today. Professor Hart raised an eyebrow. Interesting. And now, she continued calmly, you're wondering if Emily could interact with her. I blinked in surprise. How did you know? She smiled faintly. Curiosity is a powerful force in identity exploration. Then she stepped closer. Tell me something, Ethan. Her voice softened. If Emily met Mia, do you think Mia would like her? The question hit me harder than I expected. I didn't answer. But deep down I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. That night I returned to my dorm still dressed as Emily, still wearing the bracelet, still feeling that strange warmth in my mind. Standing in front of the mirror again, something unusual happened. For the first time I didn't immediately think about Ethan. Instead a different thought appeared. What if this experiment doesn't just change how people see me? What if it changes who I really am? And somewhere deep in my mind, the name Emily felt slightly more natural than it had the day before. But the real problem was still ahead. Because tomorrow, Mia would finally meet Emily. And that meeting was about to change everything. The next morning I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. Not fear. Not excitement. Something more confusing than either. For several seconds I simply lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to remember who I was supposed to be today. Then my eyes drifted toward the mirror across the room. And everything came rushing back. The experiment. Professor Hart. Emily. My stomach twisted when I realized I was still wearing the bracelet. It felt warm again, as if it had never stopped working. I sat up slowly. This is getting out of control, I whispered. But even as I said it, part of my mind was already thinking about the mirror again, about the girl I had seen yesterday, about how natural it had begun to feel. That thought frightened me more than anything. My phone vibrated. A message from Mia. Are you free today? I want to introduce you to someone I met yesterday. My heart skipped. Someone she met yesterday? My fingers felt strangely numb as I typed back. Who? Her reply came instantly. A girl named Emily. She's really sweet. I think you'd like her. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Mia liked Emily. She had already talked with her. Trusted her. Smiled at her. And she had absolutely no idea that Emily was me. I dropped my phone onto the bed and covered my face with my hands. This is insane. But it was already happening. 2 hours later I stood outside a cafe near campus. As Emily again. The dress felt more comfortable this time. The makeup was easier to apply. The wig almost felt natural. That realization sent a chill down my spine. Because the more natural Emily felt, the less certain Ethan seemed. The bracelet pulsed softly against my wrist. Then the cafe door opened. Mia stepped inside. My heart leapt into my throat. She looked exactly the same, confident, beautiful, completely unaware that her boyfriend was standing just a few feet away disguised as someone else. Her face lit up when she saw me. Emily. Hearing that name from her lips sent a strange shock through my chest. I forced a small smile. Hi. She walked over and hugged me. Actually hugged me. For a moment my brain completely froze. Because I was standing there embracing my own girlfriend while pretending to be someone else. You look amazing today, Mia said happily. Thanks, I murmured. Then she said the words I had been dreading. I want you to meet my boyfriend. My heart nearly stopped. Because in that moment I realized something terrifying. If Ethan walked through that door right now, everything would collapse. Luckily Ethan wasn't there. Only Emily was. Mia frowned slightly when I didn't respond. You okay? Yeah, I said quickly. I just haven't met him yet. She laughed. Well, you will soon. He's a little shy, but he's really sweet. And as she spoke, a strange emotion twisted inside my chest. Jealousy. It didn't make sense. Mia was talking about me. Yet hearing her describe Ethan while I stood there as Emily felt completely different. It was like standing outside my own life, watching it from a distance. That evening I returned to Professor Hart's laboratory. The moment she saw me, her expression brightened with excitement. You met Mia, she said immediately. It wasn't a question. How did you know? I asked. She casually pointed toward a row of monitors. My stomach dropped. You've been watching me? Of course, she replied calmly. This is a controlled study. My pulse sped up. You never said you'd be monitoring everything. Professor Hart tilted her head slightly. Would you have behaved naturally if you knew? I didn't respond. Because she was right. She stepped closer, studying my expression like a scientist observing a rare reaction. You're emotionally involved now, she said with quiet satisfaction. Excellent. Excellent. I snapped. My girlfriend just introduced me to myself. That, she said softly, is the beauty of identity fluidity. You're experiencing existence from two perspectives at once. Then she pointed toward the mirror. Tell me honestly, Ethan. When you look at her, what do you see? I hesitated. Then I turned toward the reflection. The girl looking back seemed confident, graceful, vibrant. And for the first time, I didn't think of her as a disguise. Emily, I whispered. Professor Hart smiled. Exactly. Then she added something that froze my heart. The transformation is almost complete. My stomach tightened. What transformation? She looked at me carefully. You didn't believe this experiment was temporary, did you? Cold dread spread through my chest. What are you talking about? Professor Hart gently tapped the bracelet on my wrist. That device doesn't merely influence behavior. It's reshaping the identity associations within your mind. My chest tightened. You said it was psychological conditioning. It is, she replied calmly. But conditioning can become permanent. My breath caught. You're changing who I am. Professor Hart shook her head slightly. No. I'm revealing who you might become. No, I said, stepping back. That wasn't the agreement. But as I moved away, the bracelet pulsed suddenly. A powerful wave of warmth surged through my mind. And with it came something terrifying. Memories. Not new memories, but altered ones. Moments from my past shifting in strange ways. Scenes where Emily existed instead of Ethan. My head spun. What's happening to me? I whispered. Professor Hart watched closely. Your identities are merging. At that moment, the laboratory door suddenly opened. Both of us turned. And my blood ran cold. Mia stood in the doorway. Her expression was confused, suspicious, curious. I knew something strange was going on, she said slowly. Her eyes moved between Professor Hart and me. Ethan said he was helping with some research project. Then her gaze settled on my face. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. You look familiar. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The room seemed to shrink around me. Just one more second, one more look, and Mia might finally realize the truth. I could see the moment building in her eyes. The moment of recognition. The moment everything would collapse. Then the bracelet pulsed again. Harder than before. My vision blurred. My thoughts twisted into chaos. And the last thing I heard before darkness swallowed everything was Mia whispering a single word. Emily. When I opened my eyes again, silence filled the room. The lights in the lab were dim. Machines hummed quietly nearby. My head felt heavy, like my thoughts had been rearranged while I was unconscious. For several seconds I simply stared at the ceiling, trying to remember what had happened. Then the memories returned. Professor Hart. The bracelet. Emily. Mia standing in the doorway. My heart began racing again. I pushed myself upright. Mia. My voice sounded different. Softer. Almost unfamiliar. I looked around the room. Professor Hart stood near the computer, watching me with calm curiosity. Across the lab stood Mia. But she wasn't angry. She wasn't shouting. She was simply staring at me, confused, trying to make sense of something impossible. You fainted, Professor Hart said calmly. I ignored her. My eyes stayed fixed on Mia. She slowly walked closer. Each step tightened the pressure in my chest. Finally she stopped right in front of me. Close enough that I could see uncertainty in her eyes. Emily, she said softly. The name sent another strange ripple through my mind. Then she asked the question that froze my blood. Where's Ethan? My throat tightened. For a moment I couldn't answer. Two voices battled inside my mind. One whispered the truth. Tell her. But another voice, quieter, warmer, said something else. You are Emily. The bracelet pulsed again. And suddenly the mirror across the room caught my attention. My reflection stared back. The same girl from the last 2 days. The girl Mia had laughed with at the cafe. The person she trusted. And for one horrifying moment, I couldn't remember what Ethan looked like anymore. I blinked rapidly. No, I whispered. Mia stepped closer. What's wrong? Her voice was filled with concern. Concern for Emily. Because as far as she knew, Ethan wasn't even here. I struggled to speak. But Professor Hart suddenly stepped forward. I think it's time you understood what this project really is. Mia turned sharply toward her. What did you do to him? Professor Hart didn't look guilty. If anything, she looked proud. This study explores the flexibility of human identity. Mia's eyes narrowed. You mean you brainwashed him? No, Professor Hart said calmly. I helped him discover another version of himself. She gestured toward me. Right now his mind is balancing two identities. Ethan and Emily. My hands began trembling. Make it stop, I whispered. Professor Hart studied me. But why? Because I don't know who I am anymore. The words escaped before I could stop them. The room fell silent. Mia slowly turned back toward me. And for the first time something changed in her expression. Recognition. A small piece of truth clicking into place. Ethan, she whispered. My heart jolted. The way she said my name felt like someone throwing a rope to pull me out of deep water. Yes, I said quickly. It's me. But the bracelet pulsed again. And suddenly the name Ethan felt distant. Unfamiliar. Professor Hart noticed instantly. Fascinating, she murmured. The identities are still competing. Mia grabbed my hand. Take the bracelet off, she said urgently. I tried. But the clasp wouldn't move. Professor Hart stepped forward again. You can remove it, she said calmly. But you should understand something first. Mia glared at her. What? Professor Hart's voice dropped slightly. If the bracelet comes off now, the brain will stabilize around whichever identity is strongest. My stomach twisted. What does that mean? She looked directly at me. It means one of them will disappear. The word struck like a hammer. Disappear. Yes. She gestured toward the mirror. Either Ethan remains, or Emily does. Mia tightened her grip on my hands. That's insane. But Professor Hart simply waited. Watching me. Waiting for my choice. The bracelet felt warmer than ever. My thoughts pulled in two directions. One side filled with memories of my life. My past, my friends, my name. Ethan. The other side held something new. Confidence. Freedom. A version of myself that felt strangely alive. Emily. And the terrifying part was that both felt real. Mia's voice cut through the chaos. Ethan, please. Hearing my name again made my chest ache. But the mirror drew my attention once more. The girl staring back looked frightened. But she also looked strong. Alive in a way Ethan had never quite been. Professor Hart spoke again. Who do you want to be? The laboratory fell completely silent. Even the machine seemed to pause. Mia waited. Professor Hart waited. The mirror waited. Inside my mind, two voices whispered different answers. Slowly I reached toward the bracelet. My fingers touched the clasp. Then I stopped. Because suddenly I realized something terrifying. I didn't know which life I wanted. I looked at Mia. Then at my reflection. Then at Professor Hart. And finally I whispered something that shocked all of us. What if I choose neither? For the first time Professor Hart's eyes widened. That outcome wasn't part of the experiment. I took a slow breath. Maybe it should be. The bracelet glowed faintly on my wrist. My identity hanging in the balance. One decision away from changing everything forever. And as the world fades into darkness, only one question remains. Who will survive the experiment? Ethan, Emily, or someone entirely new?